Happy New Year to everybody. And I'm really excited to kick off our series for 2023, talking all about bone health and how we can prevent osteoporosis and support healthy aging of bones. So I titled this presentation, Boosting Bone Health. Perfect. All right. So I want to talk about what happens to our bones as we age. I know a lot of this information may seem kind of depressing, right? Oh my gosh, my body's falling apart and things, but I want you to keep in mind the purpose of this presentation is all about prevention of things. Okay. So it may seem, I don't want you to take it as, oh my goodness, what's happening to my body, but more, what can I do to prevent these things? So of course it is natural for our bone loss to accelerate in midlife. That's usually late 40s, early 50s. For women, menopause further exacerbates or accelerates the loss of bone as protective levels of estrogen decline. So for some women, it can happen a little bit earlier at 45 if they go into menopause a little bit earlier in life, or, perimenopausal state, or around 50s, 55. Okay, so depending on that time. For men, the bone loss is a bit more gradual because levels of testosterone decline a little bit more slowly. So men have a little bit more of an advantage in that area. By the age of 65, though, both men and women lose bone mass at the same exact rate. And then for every 5 years that passes after the age of 5, the risk of fractures does double. So we want to make sure that's kind of the key time to kind of get that calcium and vitamin D, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think we've all heard of the term osteoporosis. What exactly is it? So it is a disease characterized by low bone density, resulting in an increased risk of fracture. Breakage usually occurs in the hips, spine, and wrist. Often there are no symptoms, until the first fracture occurs. So until somebody has a, freak accident or an accidental fall, which, accidents are the worst, right? So that's what happens. That's when they find out, oh my gosh, my bones are brittle. There's no other symptoms. You just go about your daily life like normal. There's no fever. There's no other symptoms or anything like that to know until you have that first fall. So it's often referred to as a silent disease because there are no symptoms prior, okay, especially any physical ones. I want to bring up something that's very interesting. Now, all of us are past this age, but if you do have children, grandchildren, family members, coworkers that are in this age range, it is really important to highlight this to them. So both men and women actually reach peak bone mass by the age of 30. I wish that we're told this when we're younger, but we're not. So that's why if you can save somebody, that's great. If someone doesn't consume enough of the recommended amounts of calcium, vitamin D, and other bone health supporting nutrients during that childhood, that adolescence, high school, and that young adulthood, this can put a person at risk of osteoporosis later in life. So osteoporosis is sometimes referred to as the young people's disease with older people consequences. So those risk of fractures, things like that, could be from what you didn't do as a youngster, okay, in those key times of life up to the age of 30. So I want you all to kind of take a minute and think about, what were you eating as a kid? What did you do in your 20s and in your, late 20s as well? Did you, get enough calcium, enough vitamin D? If you didn't, that could put you at more risk now in your time of life. Let's look at some fast facts for osteoporosis. About 10 million Americans have osteoporosis, and another 44 million Americans have a low bone density, placing them at risk, at increased risk for osteoporosis. 54 million Americans, about 50% of all adults ages 50 and older, are at risk of breaking a bone. So that's quite a bit. As I mentioned earlier, 1 in 2 women, so a little bit higher risk in women, and up to 1 in 4 men will break a bone in their lifetime due to osteoporosis. For women, of course, this incidence is greater. The incidence is greater than heart attack, stroke, and breast cancer combined. So especially women need to be more aware of this risk. Diet, exercise, and a healthy lifestyle are keys to preventing and managing the disease. That is why you are all here today, and why some of you may be watching this video later, is because you do want to, take those precautions and preventing this, which is such an awesome thing. There are other risk factors as well of osteoporosis that I do want to mention as well. For people that do drink alcohol excessively, that can put them at risk of osteoporosis. So I have the exact number of drinks there: caffeine intake, tobacco use. So we'll talk a little bit more about caffeine later on in this presentation. Of course, family history always puts people at risk of things. So if you know anyone in your family, I would say immediate family, not distant cousins, but siblings, parents, grandparents, anyone in that immediate, lineage of osteoporosis or hip fractures, things like that, that could put you at higher risk. Immobilization or inadequate physical activity. So basically inadequate activity. Increasing age, low body weight. So those that, are under 128 pounds. If you're at a healthy weight, I should mention, that 128 pounds could be a healthy weight, but really lower body weight. Of course, not eating enough calcium and vitamin D. We're going to talk a lot about that right now. Personal history of fractures, smoking, white or Asian race. Okay, so those are just some other risk factors to think about. How do we, again, why are you all here? What are you all learning about today? How do we manage this? How do we prevent osteoporosis? Certainly, we're going to be focusing a lot on calcium, vitamin D, and protein. Those are your 3 really important nutrients to focus on when you look at bone health. Other essential, nutrients that are important to bone health are magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium. We're going to look at sodium and caffeine and discuss their roles in their negative impacts on calcium absorption. Okay. So we'll look at those as well today. If you all either saw my presentation or attended that first presentation that I gave, I believe it was in September of last year in 2022, I spent a whole lot of time discussing, the key components to healthy aging. And we spent a lot of time on the plate. I unfortunately cannot spend would be here for 2 hours talking about the plate again, but the food groups that I'm really going to be focusing on today are going to be foods in the dairy group, the protein group, and the vegetable group. So you'll see foods highlighted on those 3 portions of the plate today. Okay. All right. The first kind of magic ingredient to bone health and promoting, proper bone health is calcium. So calcium, about 99% of the body's calcium reserves are stored in the bones. That's why it's such a hot vitamin hot mineral when it comes to bone health. Calcium serves as a structural and functional supporter of bone mass. All right. It is considered, the last dietary guidelines got published, the 2020 to 2025 got published in 2020. We're still in those guidelines. And we found that most Americans are not meeting the RDA, which stands for the recommended dietary allowance, which means that it is considered a nutrient of public health concern. That's what we mean by that. For any adults ages 19 to 50, the recommended, dietary allowance is 1,000 milligrams per day. And for anyone that is 51 and older, it's 1,200 milligrams per day for females and 1,000 for males. Okay. So again, you guys know why females need a little bit more. I explained why, in the beginning of this presentation. The upper limit is 20, meaning, that's what they say is safe to go up to, but you don't want to go past that. Is 2,500 milligrams per day for adults ages 19 to 50 and 2,000 milligrams for adults 51 and older. Okay, let's talk about what foods, have high amounts of calcium. I'm assuming you all can think about, calcium. What is it associated with? Dairy products. Okay, so dairy products are going to be your highest sources of calcium. You can see in this chart here, that the highest levels there are going to be things like cheese, yogurt, milk, a Greek yogurt as well, all of your cheeses here, okay? So that's going to be your highest levels of calcium per serving. Just to give you an idea for yogurt, what does 6 ounces mean? Those are going to be your individual little containers, your individual sizes of yogurts. That's what 6 ounces is. If you guys use kind of the bigger yogurts and then scoop it out yourself, I just always refer to 1 cup right here as the 8 ounces. So 6 ounces would be just about 2/3 of a cup, a little bit less than that. Okay. Just to give you an idea. For cheese, a couple ounces is going to be right here in that palm of your hand. That would be about 1 ounce. For shredded cheese, a serving is usually 1/3 of a cup, which is about this much. Okay, so this is 1/3 right here. So a little bit smaller than that palm of your hand, kind of halfway between a hand cupped and palm of your hand right there. Okay. So just to give you an idea, you can see the milligrams are pretty high in calcium. Now, in this day and age, I'm seeing a lot of people straying away from dairy these days for various reasons. Either they're intolerant, they're allergic, they just don't like the taste, the consistency. So I do want to highlight a few other foods, again, remember in those vegetable and protein groups on that My Plate, to show that you can get calcium in non-dairy sources as well. So if you're a type of person that just doesn't like any dairy at all, or can't tolerate it, you can get some calcium, of course, in almond milk here, as you can see, tofu, almonds, calcium fortified orange juice, soy milk, all flavors, sardines with the bones canned in oil. So again, that's going to be in your protein group. A lot of your dark green leafy veggies. So kale, mustard spinach, collard greens. So you'll see a lot of those here on this slide, a little bit in broccoli, a little bit in sunflower seeds and chia seeds, which are your plant-based protein. So there are other ways to get calcium in other foods that are not dairy. The best recommendation that I have is to really get a variety. I'll have a lot of clients that cannot do cow's milk at all, but can do Greek yogurt, and they're completely fine with it because there's a lot less lactose in that. So I always say combine the Greek yogurt with the kale, with a salad with chia seeds on it, for example, or even the chia seeds and the Greek yogurt. That way you're getting a lot of calcium in that meal, and you're kind of doing a mix and match and not just doing all dairy or all non-dairy. It is going to take a little bit more because there's no vitamin D in a lot of these foods. You do have to eat larger quantities of these non-dairy sources to match, for example, the vitamin D that's going to be in dairy sources. So again, dairy is still the gold standard, I would say, but you can easily incorporate a lot of these foods into your diet to get that same effect. Okay. All right, perfect. And as always, with all of my presentations thus far, I am happy to send the slides to you. That way, if I'm going really fast and you didn't get that information with the milligrams and things, you can grab that later. Okay. The percent of calcium absorbed in the body does depend on the total amount of elemental calcium consumed at once. So this is a really interesting piece of information. A lot of times people focus on supplements to get their vitamins, their micronutrients and their minerals, but our body actually prefers to absorb calcium in smaller amounts. So when people are taking these giant supplements that have, 1,000 milligrams a day, which is what's recommended, right? You're actually not doing your body a disservice. You're actually absorbing less. So what I recommend and what the research recommends and scientists and doctors recommend is splitting up the calcium into smaller, more frequent amounts. So if that means, you do a little bit of yogurt, for example, in the morning, and then you have a nice salad, kale salad with chia seeds sprinkled on top, for lunch, that is going to be the best way that you're going to maximize calcium absorption. It's not eating all of it in one meal or taking a giant supplement all at once. It's really divvying up the amount that you're eating in smaller, more frequent amounts during the day. Now, here's a fun fact that kind of counteracts what we have on the other slide, which is why I think dairy is still the gold standard. There are something called phytates and oxalates. I don't want to get super scientific, just very basic here. They're chemical compounds that can bind to calcium and actually block them from being absorbed. Guess what foods that these are found in? They're found in spinach, in kale, which were both on the previous slide. They're also sometimes found in beans. Beans was also on the previous slide. Okay. So because of that, relying on those foods to get your calcium may actually not be the best thing. They do have calcium in them, but they also have these. So that's why I recommend, if I go back to the other slide here, again, that you try to get dairy foods, but try to pick some of these foods like almonds, you're usually okay on, those are fine. Or doing kale, and the yogurt, that type of thing. So that way you don't have that calcium being inhibited from being absorbed. Okay. And why you should focus on those dairy sources first. Alcohol, sodium, and caffeine all block the absorption of calcium. Okay. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on sodium and caffeine later on in this presentation to give you more info on that. Vitamin D helps the absorption of calcium. So you always want to have those two nutrients together. If you eat a lot of calcium, but you don't have enough vitamin D, again, you're not going to maximize all that absorption that you're doing. All right, let's talk about supplements for a second. So there are two major types that you'll see out there, at all major markets, GNC, CVS's, all of those stores, drugstores as well. Calcium carbonate and citrate. I want to highlight the differences for you if you are somebody that is thinking about a supplement. Carbonate is certainly the best value, and it does contain the highest amount of elemental calcium. If you remember on the slide I just talked about, absorption is dependent upon the amount of elemental calcium that you're getting. It does require stomach acid for absorption. So it's best to take this product with food versus taking it on its own. Some people may experience, because of that, some people may experience mild constipation or bloating. Here are some examples of ones on the market that have the carbonate. The citrate. This citrate is absorbed a little bit more easily than the calcium carbonate. It can be taken on meaning it can be taken on an empty stomach. And it does contain a little bit less elemental, 21%. So you may need to take a little bit more of it, higher dosage or things like that because of that elemental. And then here are some examples for you. Okay. As a dietitian, and hopefully most doctors will always recommend to get your nutrients from food first over supplements. This is really, supplements are kind of your backup source when the generator runs out. If you are not able to eat a lot of those foods that I just recommended for whatever reason, then a supplement may be needed. But I always tell people when I'm working with them one-on-one or teaching a class like this is always try to focus on your diet first and find out where in your diet you're deficient, and then focus on getting those foods in. If you've done that, you've been doing your due diligence and your homework, and you're still your bones are still coming back brittle on a DEXA scan or something like that, then you may need to take a supplement. Okay. But we want to make sure that we're following that rule of no more than 500 milligrams in one sitting. So that way you can really maximize your absorption. All right. So here is the summary for calcium. Always get your calcium from food first, supplement second. Calcium can be obtained through both dairy and non-dairy sources. You always want to spread calcium-rich foods evenly throughout the day to maximize your absorption. So you're not doing too much in one sitting, which can actually, hinder that absorption. Phytates, oxalates, sodium, caffeine, and alcohol all hinder the absorption of calcium. That is why in that slide I had mentioned that those that do drink quite a bit are at risk for osteoporosis. It's because of this. And vitamin D promotes absorption. You always want to eat a well-balanced diet that contains calcium-rich foods. All right, let's move on to vitamin D. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin that's naturally produced in the body when our body is exposed to sun exposure. It promotes, of course, that calcium absorption in the gut and helps our bodies maintain adequate calcium levels in our blood. serum levels, meaning in our blood, to enable normal mineralization of the bone. So we absolutely need both. They work hand in hand together. Without sufficient vitamin D, bones can become thin, brittle, and misshapen, of course, putting you at risk for a fracture or a fall, later on in life. There are two types of vitamin D. D2 is found mainly in plant source foods and fortified foods, and D3 is produced in the body via sunlight and found mainly in animal sources. The good news about vitamin D, it's one of those hot vitamins that's been, really talked about the last 5 years or so. And now we're testing for it in blood tests to know if you're deficient or not in it, which is great. Okay. The nutrition recommendations for vitamin D. Vitamin D, just like calcium, is considered to be a nutrient of public health concern, which means that most Americans are not getting the recommended daily allowance. It seems like everybody I know and their mother, brother, sister are deficient in vitamin D when I see those lab results. So it's very common, okay, to see that. Here are the reference intakes. For people ages 1 to 70 years old, it's 600 IU. IU stands for international units. However, some studies recommended higher amounts for optimum blood levels. And for those individuals who are 70 and older, it's 800 IU. The upper limit is 4,000 IUs per day. I did put a star down there, kind of a little caveat to that. There are several professional societies, and bodies out there that do recommend higher levels of vitamin D than what's listed here. So you may see conflicting information across different various medical boards and societies. So I just wanted to put that out there. But either way, going over is usually never an issue because generally speaking, we're not getting enough. So everybody should be fine and not be panicked that they're going too high over what is recommended. Okay, I just wanted to show you that. Sources of vitamin D. There are very limited food sources of vitamin D in the diet. So it's even more important to incorporate the foods in this chart as frequently as possible. A lot of the foods here are not very common in our diet. Cod liver oil, I don't think that's very common in our everyday diet. But things like salmon is pretty common, swordfish, tuna, fortified orange juice, milk. So all your dairy products, again, are popping up. You'll see that. Yogurt. I wouldn't really recommend margarine as an option, but it is on this list. Sardines, liver, beef liver. Eggs are great. They have vitamin D. Ready to eat cereal. So a lot of our cereals are fortified with vitamin D, meaning that it's added. And then cheese. So you'll notice a common theme here that the dairy products are going to be, also high in vitamin D. But I'm going to add fish and eggs to this list. So if you are somebody that is not eating a lot of fish right now and you're eating a lot more red meat and chicken, just think about swapping the quantities, doing a little bit more fish and a little bit less chicken and red meat just throughout your week. Okay. Again, if you're not eating dairy foods, it definitely puts you at a risk for being, low in both calcium and vitamin D. Let's talk about absorption a little bit for D. Vitamin D is made from cholesterol when your skin is exposed to UVB rays. Those that are, darker skinned or have a little bit more pigmentation in their skin do need to spend just a little bit longer in that sunlight than those that have a little bit less melanin in their skin to produce the same amount of vitamin D. We, being here in Southern California, really have no issues getting sunlight, even if it seems like it's raining a lot and things like that. We usually have no problem getting enough in our day. But those that are in, places like Alaska and Norway that get that are really far north, really far away from the equator, are going to have a little bit more harder time and maybe more at risk of deficiency because their sunlight is so limited during those winter months. So that should not be an issue with us here. We should be okay. The recommended amount of time to be outside or being exposed to the sun, even if you're working outside, getting a walk in, is 10 to 30 minutes a day. Again, those that are darker skin may need to hit more of that 30 minutes than the 10. Absorption is best in your, upper arms right here. So your arms, your face, your legs, and your back. Okay, that's the best places for absorption. The length of time is dependent upon the time of day you are exposed to the sun. So we're looking at anywhere between 10 a.m. and 3. I mean, again, if you try to go out at 4:45 when the sun is setting at 5:15, that may not be the best time to get that absorption. Of course, sunscreen is extremely important, so I don't want to not mention that. Several studies have shown that wearing sunscreen only has a small impact on vitamin D, because of course that blocks the UVB and UVA rays to protect us against skin cancer. My conclusion on it is this: I think go out for the 10 to 30 minutes, go on a nice little walk your dog, walk with a friend. And then after that 10 to 30 minutes, that's when I would immediately put on the sunscreen, because I'm a huge fan of sunscreen. I don't think we should not wear that either. I feel like that's okay, because I don't believe that 10 to 30 minutes can cause too much damage. If you're really, really concerned, then maybe go with a lower SPF just for those 10 to 30 minutes and then go ahead and reapply, the heavier SPF. But that's kind of what I say is the best of getting both worlds. You're getting your vitamin D absorption, but also protecting yourself against the harmful rays of the sun. When it comes to supplements and fortified foods, we have two types of vitamin D, okay? Vitamin D is manufactured by UV irradiation of yeast. And then D3 is the one that's the most common out there. That's usually the one I recommend and the one that you see the most. It's found in, manufactured by cholesterol. So it's basically a manufactured version of what's happening when the skin hits us, okay? That's usually the one I recommend with a calcium supplement at the same time if you need to do that. If you are vegan, by the way, I wanted to mention this, it is going to be automatic that you need to be on a supplement, okay? Because if you look at that list of foods, everything I mentioned minus the fortified cereal and the orange juice is going to be an animal product: eggs, cheese, yogurt, and fish, right? So automatically I have to put somebody on a supplement. There are very few plant-based products that have vitamin D, okay? Automatic already, okay? So if that is someone like you who is following a vegan diet, recommend being on a supplement automatically. Of course, when it comes to which type do I buy, they do find that at higher doses, vitamin D2 is not as potent. So I would recommend D3, okay, as your choice of supplement if you do need to be on one. And again, you haven't focused on your diet first. All right. Conclusions here with D: always get your D from food first, supplement second. Spend 10 to 30 minutes daily in the sun for optimal production of D. Best time of day is 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you are not able to be out in the sun, so if you do know somebody that is homebound, broke their leg, can't really move, can't get out, or people that work graveyard shifts that are usually sleeping during this time, supplementations may be necessary. Of course, you always want to eat a well-balanced diet containing the foods that were on that slide that are high in vitamin D. All right, let's talk about protein. So protein in the form of collagen is a major structural component of bone. Bone undergoes continuous turnover and remodeling throughout our life. They say we actually have a new skeleton every 5 to 10 years, depending on the person, even in our, lifespan where we're at now. So adequate intake is absolutely needed. Bone mineral density appears to be positively associated with higher protein intake. Protein is essential for muscle growth and repair, and we'll talk a little bit about exercise and bone health towards the end of the presentation today. So what is the recommended daily allowance? The recommended daily allowance is 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight for adults 70 and older, and 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight for adults 18 and over. Certainly more protein is needed with advanced age based on what I just mentioned on the slide before. How to calculate how much you need for you and how to go from pounds to kilograms. You take your pounds and you divide by 2.2. So if you're 150 pounds, you do 150 divided by 2.2 and then multiply it by 1. or by 1.1 or 1.2 to get your protein needs. I have seen a lot of research to say that the 0.8 may not be enough. So I think it's really just dependent upon you. If you feel like you're not eating enough or you feel like you want a little bit more, you can definitely go to 1. I think that's a good kind of space to be in. If you feel like you're at higher risk, if you've gone through menopause, you can definitely go to the 1.1, 1.2. Okay, that's how you would calculate it for you. Certainly supplements are not needed for protein. We get more than enough in our diet, especially in our American diet. So it is not a nutrient of concern at all. Definitely not. We're getting more than enough. It's best to spread your protein just like the calcium, to have a little bit of protein at breakfast, a little bit of protein at lunch, a little bit of protein at dinner, and some at your snacks to maximize absorption. It is not recommended to eat more than 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal because you actually will put stress on the kidneys and you're going to pretty much pee out a lot of it than actually utilizing it properly. So that is the recommended kind of target at every single meal and snack. Okay. And all of your animal products are going to have, your milk, so all of your animals, okay, I should say animal protein, and then products derived from animals like milk, yogurt, cheese, eggs, butter, things like that come from animal products are going to have all your 9 essential amino acids, which are the amino acids are building blocks of protein that we cannot get in our body, that we have to get from food. There are some plant-based products that do have all the 9 essential, which are going to be your tofu, your edamame, quinoa, amaranth, and buckwheat. But most plant-based proteins are going to be lacking 1 or more of the amino acids. I'm not saying you can't be vegetarian or anything like that. It just means you have to be more mindful about incorporating all different types to get those. Okay, great. On this slide, and again, I'll be sending this to you, so you don't need to worry about writing everything down on it or worry if I go too quickly. I just want to show you how many grams of protein are in serving sizes. So just for reference, if those of you did not watch or were not present at my very first class, 3 ounces of chicken, beef, pork, basically all meat and fish right here. This is a deck of cards. So it's about the palm of my hand right here. This is, so if you look at that first line item, 3 ounces of a chicken breast will have about 25 grams of protein. So that fits in within the 20 and 30 grams. Fish, again, about 3 ounces right here. This will be about, 20 grams of protein. So also fits in there. Okay. For peanut butter, 2 tablespoons, and just to show you what a tablespoon looks like, it's a hitchhiker's thumb, about the size of your whole thumb here from top to bottom. So if you were to do 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, that would be only 7 grams of protein, which is not as much, of course, which means you need to be a little bit more mindful. Milk is a great source of protein too. It has the calcium, the vitamin D, but it also has a good 8 grams right there, which can be really helpful, if you're trying to sneak in more protein in your day. So again, I'll be sending this to you so you don't have to worry. When it comes to protein, we want to choose the leanest sources of animal protein. So we want to avoid those processed, the cold cuts, the hot dogs, some deli meat, sausage, jerky. Those tend to be a lot higher in saturated fat and in sodium, possibly added sugar as well. So when you're eating, red meat, or, you want to choose those leaner cuts, trim away any excess fat. Same thing with turkey as well. If you have chicken, you want to try to remove that skin and go skinless, because that's where most of our saturated fat is. You'll still get that protein, but a lot less saturated fat out of there. And then I want you to all think about your own diets. If you're eating mostly red meat, really think about replacing it with that fish so you can really get that vitamin D, but also get that protein, a lot less saturated fat and a ton of heart healthy fat as well. And then, certainly incorporating that plant-based protein can be a great way to get some more protein if you want to kind of cut down on costs as well. Okay. All right. Let's talk about 2 things that block the absorption of calcium. Too much sodium can actually cause your body to excrete more calcium. Usually it's through the urine. Okay. This results in a net loss of calcium from the body and can put you at risk for osteoporosis. The dietary guidelines for Americans limit sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams per day, which is equivalent to a teaspoon. This is a teaspoon, which is the top of your thumb to the top of your first knuckle. That's what's recommended a day, okay, between foods and beverages. So it looks like it's not a lot, but I'll explain how we can get that down. The American Heart Association says, you know what? We're going to go even less than that. We're going to say it's a limit of 1,500 milligrams per day. The average American consumes about 3,400 milligrams per day, which is above both of those recommendations. Let's find out where most of our sodium is coming from. Sodium does, it is an essential nutrient. So I don't want to hate on sodium too much. Okay. So we absolutely need it for sure. It's just how much, right? It always comes down to portion size. So sodium is naturally occurring in foods like eggs. It definitely can be found in a lot of foods that are pre-packaged because salt is a preservative of a lot of our foods. But majority of that sodium is coming from restaurants. So when you order out, that's where most of it's coming from. So just by cooking more in the home, going to restaurants and just asking, hey, can you maybe not add any extra salt on XYZ? I always tell people the worst that they can say is no. Always try and ask. You never know. Maybe they can do those vegetables without any salt or not add any salt on those, on that piece of meat or things like that. Of course, processed and pre-packaged foods, that's where you're going to find most of it. So pre-made soups, frozen dinners, frozen burritos, things like that. That's where you're going to find majority of it. About 71% is coming from it. Okay. Your top items that are going to have sodium, breads and rolls, pizza, sandwiches, cold cuts and cured meats, soups. And these are all not homemade things. These are all things that you would buy, out. Cheese, eggs and omelets, chicken, savory snacks, burritos, and tacos. Okay. So that's where you're going to find a lot of the, salts. So the best way to cut down is really to just make more homemade things. If you can recreate any recipes that you like at home, and that way you can control how much sodium is going in it and still enjoy it. I'm going to talk about food labels in a moment. Food labels are a great way to know how much sodium is in something. So just by flipping that over and looking at it and understanding that, limiting your portions, I'm not saying eliminate, but limiting your portions of processed or high sodium foods. Checking brands. Some brands may have a low sodium, no salt added version of something. For example, like canned veggies. You can always buy the regular ones, or they have ones that have no added salt. Same thing with canned soups. There may be a low sodium version as well. Don't be afraid to use herbs and spices. I never want anyone to have any bland food. That's not what nutrition's about. That's not what eating is about. But your herbs and spices, other than celery salt, onion salt, garlic salt, and salt, there's no sodium in any other, herbs and spices. So you can go crazy with those and enjoy the flavors, the textures, the scents of food using your herbs and spices without having to worry about, this excess calcium absorption, without having to worry about high blood pressure, and still getting that same wonderful taste that you may enjoy depending on what you like. When you make more things at home, you'll find that you'll just need a little bit of salt and it will be fine. In fact, just reducing your sodium by 25% will have no effect on the palate. Okay. So that's pretty much, just by cutting that down, you'll notice, this really didn't make a huge difference to me, but it makes a huge difference nutrition wise. And then consider making your own sauces, spices, dressings. You'll save a lot on sugar, by the way, not just salt and saturated fat, just by making your own homemade dressing. You can control how much is going on there. All right, great. Another thing I should mention too, if you go to the market and you can't find, let's say no salt added beans or veggies or anything like that, you can always dump the can of beans or peas or corn or whatever it is in a colander. That's what you drain pasta, and then rinse it under the sink, and you'll get rid of a lot more salt that way as well. So you can do that. You can also dilute your soups too. So if you can only find canned soup and they ran out of the low sodium version, maybe split your soup in half and then add the rest half of it just water. That will cut down on the sodium as well. Okay. Let's talk about caffeine. I'm a huge coffee drinker, so this is not to deter anybody from drinking coffee. I'm going to explain why in a second. Okay. So caffeine consumption is negatively associated with calcium only when, okay, so not everybody, it's only when people have about 3 cups or more of caffeine a day. So if you just have 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day, you're fine. Okay. 3, they're saying is kind of the max. All right. But if you're doing 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day, that's when you want to start thinking about, maybe I need to start cutting this down. Okay. So it's not telling you coffee is bad. It's just saying in higher amounts. We do see a little bit more of calcium excretion in that urine. Okay. It decreases calcium by 4 to 7 milligrams, which is not super high, but is something, and can increase the risk of hip fractures specifically. Now here, this is another point to think about. If you only have 2 cups of coffee a day, but you're really not good about getting your dairy in and all those foods I talked about, your calcium and vitamin D, and you're already low in those areas, well, then we not need to start thinking about the coffee. Okay. So there are definitely caveats to this, is that it's not to blame the coffee, but you need to look at what your starting baseline is. If your blood test is coming back vitamin D low, and you're only having 1 cup of coffee a day, you may want to think, okay, let me work on, I can keep my 1 cup of coffee a day, but let me think about really working on the foods. So it's all relative to you and what your starting baseline is when you look at this slide and look at the research. Okay. If a person is ingesting at least 800 milligrams of calcium a day from any of the foods I mentioned, then those 3 cups of coffee a day are going to be fine. All right. So you have to really look at the slide and analyze this data in a way of, what is my baseline? What am I starting with? And is my coffee really going to affect me or not? Some of you may say yes. Some of you may say, nope, I'm good. I fit that criteria. Let me just work on getting that calcium and vitamin D up in my diet. Okay. Just wanted to point it out though, because it can affect for sure negatively. I want to talk about the food label briefly. Again, I can spend a whole lesson on the food label, but I only want to point out the things that are important to us and how it pertains to this class today. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but the food label drastically changed in a good way. By the way, healthcare professionals were very excited about this, and you should be too, for the first time since 1994. So about, actually it's like maybe the early 2000s, I should say. So the first major redesign in 20 plus years. By now in 2023, all of the food labels have been updated. When I was teaching the food label class in that weird transition time, we were still seeing some old labels with some new ones. So it was kind of weird, but now you should all be seeing, even the small food companies are all done, ready to go by law. Okay. It does reflect new scientific, information that's pertinent to us now. And, how are these, what is our links to diseases and what do we know about our current research? As I mentioned to you, vitamin D in the early 2000s and in 1994 was not really talked about, but now it's very pertinent. So guess what they did? They added vitamin D at the bottom of the food label now. Okay. So they got rid of vitamins A and C and added D. Well, that's really helpful for all of us, right? To know when we look at our food labels, whether there's enough vitamin D or not in that product. Of course, sodium is still on there, but the recommended daily allowances changed, the percentages on the right side. So I'll show you an example of the changes here so you can see. The old label is on the left and the new label is on the right. You'll see that vitamin D at the bottom there. Okay, so which is there. And then that's kind of just the basic one that's really important. They did keep calcium there. That did not change, but at least vitamin D is on there so you can see. All right, perfect. I have a very quick tool. Again, I can spend a whole class on this, but if you are curious, on one slide here, I have a very quick and dirty way to kind of look at food labels when you're food shopping next time. I don't want any of you spending 10 hours or 5 hours at the market, looking at every single product and everything very closely. But I have something called the 5-20 rule. Basically, the nutrients that are in green, fiber and all the vitamins and minerals, we want those to be closer to 20% daily value, which is on the right, and not close to 5. That means it's kind of low in that area. If it's closer to 5, we want them to be higher because they're good for us. Whereas the nutrients on the left side in the red, the saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium, and added sugar, we want those to be closer to 5 and not close to 20. So the complete opposite. There is an exception. Of course, there's always one, right, to everything. There are going to be products that we know just have no vitamin D. Okay. As I mentioned to you a few moments ago, right, there are products that just don't have vitamin D. There are very few foods in our diet that have vitamin D. So if we're looking at a label of pita chips, I don't know, something like that, we're not going to expect to see vitamin D and calcium in that. So because those are low, it doesn't mean, you automatically discredit that product. There are some, again, exceptions to this rule where we know that there are certain products that just don't contain those nutrients to begin with. Okay. If you have milk, for example, we know milk is not really going to have fiber. So if you see a 0 there, don't put it away and go, oh, this isn't good because it's 0 and it's not higher to 20, closer to 20, and then put it away. All right. So there are a few, of course, exceptions to this, but generally speaking, it's that 5-20 rule. So if you pick up a dairy product and it's not close to or closer to 10 to 20, 15, I wouldn't pick that probably because we should expect those dairy products to be higher in that calcium and vitamin D. Okay. Ingredients are listed from most to least on a food label. So if you're, not sure if something is good or bad, generally speaking, the more ingredients something has, the more unhealthy it is. There are certain products that you can read and you know what everything is, and it's more than 5, and that's fine, which is great. Usually 5 is kind of my cutoff on things. But there are products that will have 12 things, but you know what everything is in there. If there's something you really have no idea how to pronounce or no idea what it is, probably it's not good for you. Okay. So that's just a good kind of tool to use. Let's talk about exercising. So like muscle, bone is a living tissue that responds to exercise by becoming stronger. So as I was mentioning, our bones are constantly remodeling every 5 to 10 years. We have a brand new kind of set of bones. It's kind of crazy to think about that, even as we age and get to our, this where we are in our lifespans right now. So exercise is certainly necessary to help maintain not only muscle strength, coordination, and balance, but also that bone strength as well. Okay. When we are engaging in regular physical activity and we work on a lot of balance exercise, we have better coordination. That will also prevent falls. Okay, so that's going to help with the physical part of preventing the fall in the first place. The nutrition is going to help prevent the fracture or the aftermath of that fall. Okay, does that make sense? So the exercise is the prevention of the fall in the first place. The nutrition is the aftermath or the consequences of that fall. That's why nutrition and exercise go hand in hand and why they are both pertinent to bone health. What are the best exercises that somebody can do for bone health? I would certainly argue, weight bearing and resistance exercises. Okay. Resistance exercises encompass a big category. I would, of course, it is so important to check in with your doctor to make sure what is safe and what is not safe for you. That's always rule number 1 when you start an exercise program or engage in any kind of exercise. As a trainer myself, I always get a full health history of somebody. I need to know if they've been cleared because I would never want to put somebody, through an exercise that is going to be dangerous or, cause injury, or if their bone's already brittle, I'm putting them in a dangerous situation. So we want to make sure, number 1, you get cleared by your doctor. Second thing, what are examples of weight-bearing exercise? If you are just starting a program or, you're a little bit nervous about injury and things like that, let me put a big plug in for body weight exercises. Body weight can be just as hard as using a dumbbell. And in fact, I think body weight exercises are harder than any machines, which actually provide more assistance. So body weight exercises uses gravity. So you're working against gravity, which makes things a little bit hard. If you want to start with body weight exercises, things like squats, lunges, even just an overhead press right here, sitting at your chair, things like that without anything first, you can always start there. Then as you start to feel a little bit more comfortable, you can then start to add some dumbbells. I think resistance bands are awesome. If anyone's ever used those before, those are those little mini bands. I call them mini bands, resistance bands. Usually you can get a pack of 5 on Amazon for about $15 or any sporting goods store for about $15, $20. And they come in different resistance. So light, medium, heavy, extra heavy. And that's a great thing to bring with you also on vacation or on the go because they're so lightweight and they don't take up a lot of space. I have clients as well that do things, in their office, just even at their desk, doing things with a band. So that's a great thing to kind of progress to. If you are part of a gym, you can certainly try the machines out first before you do dumbbells. And then once you feel a little bit more comfortable, you can start using dumbbells, kettlebells, TRX strap, a weighted bar. Either way, those loads and all of those forms are going to put that, cause you to, of course, use more muscle strength, which is going to strengthen the muscles, but it's going to put the weight on that bones to help strengthen the bone as well. Okay, so that's what we're really going for there. Weight-bearing exercise can also be cardio-based. So things like walking, hiking, a light jog, of course, whatever you're capable and whatever's safe. I'm not going to say running. If you can do running, great. Climbing the stairs, anything where you're kind of putting that weight onto the joints and the bones is going to help strengthen them. Okay. So all of these, any types of exercises are great. I recommend a combination of both. So if you want to do 30 minutes of walking and then 10 minutes of body weight exercises, or you want to go 20, 10, 20 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of banded exercises, that's fine. Or you want to just do 30 minutes of strength training, that's fine as well. Swimming is technically not a weight-bearing exercise, actually. So thank you, Tony, but I actually put it in there because I still think it's a really good exercise for people that may be at risk of certain, like they can't jog or, climb stairs and have knee issues. That's why I put swimming in there. Okay. Cause that's actually good for people that may have some knee issues. Okay. Swimming, you could actually do resistance training under the water too. So that could be a weight bearing exercise in terms of, So yeah, technically, Tony, did you get your answer? I think there. So swimming is not, but I was thinking more underwater exercises when it comes to that, or if you are at risk of knee injuries and you can't do walking and that hurts, that swimming is kind of your only option. It's better than nothing there. Cool. Thank you, Tony. Perfect. And then let's see, that was a great question, by the way. We still have 3 minutes left. So we left plenty of time here. Does anyone have any more questions about bone health? If you don't feel comfortable, popping on, you can still use the chat feature of, any questions when it comes to nutrition, exercise. I think really the key here is to make sure that you are eating a diet rich of those foods that we discussed to help prevent osteoporosis and being really mindful of eating those foods every day. If you are lactose intolerant, you can easily choose Lactaid milk. That is still cow's milk with the vitamin D and calcium without the lactose. So people can digest it a lot better. I have a lot of clients who can't do milk at all, but they're fine with Greek yogurt because Greek yogurt is very low in lactose and very, very high in protein, but still has the calcium and vitamin D. So you may want to experiment with that, maybe in the comfort of your own home first to see if you can tolerate it. And then go from there. I usually have, most people are usually fine with that. Really think about your fish intake. Eggs are really good for you. So I highly recommend eating those. You can have up to 2 eggs a day, 2 egg yolks, I should say, a day, without being worried about your cholesterol. So if you want to do 1 egg and 2 egg whites, you can do that. If you're worried about your cholesterol, or even 2 eggs, hard-boiled eggs as a snack. That's a great thing. Think about eating all of your foods spread out evenly throughout the day. So a little bit of calcium, a little bit of protein in one meal, a little bit of calcium, a little bit of protein in one meal. That's going to maximize your absorption. And if you are one to, eat out a lot or dine out a lot or not really cook at home more, think about, dishes or recipes that you can make that are really easy. For you just to start out with the basics of making like a salmon fillet, in the oven, just, really simple, nothing crazy, just to start off if you're not comfortable kind of cooking yet, just think easy peasy. And then when it comes to that coffee, again, just you're fine drinking it. I'm not saying you're not allowed to have caffeine at all. You are, but just think about what your baseline is. If your blood tests keep coming back as vitamin D deficient, and you're having 2 cups of coffee a day, maybe it's experimenting with 1 cup a day and really increasing those foods versus cutting out coffee completely, and tea as well, caffeinated tea. All right, so here is my contact info. If anybody needs anything or has any additional questions, we did record this, I believe, right? So this will be up on the YouTube channel. If anybody needs to reference this later on, I will also be sending the slides for reference. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate all of you. Wishing you a healthy, happy 2023. And here's to, healthy bones and a nice long life, right? Free of osteoporosis.
Thank you so much, Melody. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.